I'm absolutely delighted, and hello to you, to those of you who are online. Absolutely delighted to introduce our Maurice Bloch lecturer for today, um, Georgia Pavlopoulou, who's Professor of Neurodiversity and
Not professor,
Associate Professor of, sorry, I'm promoting you, but
thank you very much.
Neurodiversity and Implementation at UCL. We met in London last year, and I was just blown away by Georgia's work, so I thought it was very worth bringing her to Glasgow to tell you about it. So,
thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here, and also it made me question already. I've been 24 hours here. What am I doing in London? It's just Yes, so thank you so much for the invitation. I'm going to give it a go today and talk to you about some recent work I have been doing with people at UCL, Anna Freud, and lots of colleagues at King's College, looking at emotion regulation in autism and ADHD, what I call an experience-sensitive perspective, an experience-sensitive approach, very much co-produced and co-delivered with neurodivergent people. I think I come into this research with many hats on, as somebody who likes a lot to experiment with creative methodologies and ways of getting the voices of people and the voices of people that sometimes we call hard to reach, and so on. I'm also coming into this studying neurodivergent young people and I've been a neurodivergent young person and now an older neurodivergent person with multiple neurodivergencies. And so I have been working at UCL and Anna Freud. Please do get in touch. I'm also very active on social media and I like to talk to people there, so get in touch if you want. And I'm currently chairing England's National Autism Peer Trainer Program. It's commissioned by National Health System from October last year until October 2028. And I'm really proud of this piece of work as well. If you get into the Autism Central website, you will be able to look at lots of resources, all of them co-produced and co-delivered with autistic people and their family members. An experience-sensitive approach. I guess we have written a paper with other neurodivergent colleagues, experts by science and experts by experience. And I think there's many reasons that I will try to address today into why having such a lens, which to me fits very well with what I call anti-oppressive practice in both research and clinical practice, is about handing over the stick, in terms of expertise. There's not just one expert by science or by research. It's about learning from people with lived experience. It's a neuro-inclusive approach that creates a culture of respect, honors the experiences of the person, and prioritizes personalized care. I think also it redefines it. So very often in the clinics where I have been, when we talk about person-centered care, very often we talk about the person in the center, indeed, and lots of behavioral approaches about lots of stuff that Georgia needs to fix. Skills, communication, behavior, and I'm not sure this is exactly what I would call as person-centered. I imagine it more about something that is more collaborative, that makes sense to the person as well, not just to all the good people with good intentions that want to fix the person. Do read that paper if you're interested. And when we talk about an experience-sensitive approach, which is nothing new, by the way, I think we have just expanded the life world model from Les Todres in a way that will conceptualize agency, uniqueness, sense of making, sense of personal journey from an autism ADHD perspective. So, thinking in terms of togetherness or insiderness or sense of place. For an autistic and neurodivergent person, sense of place has to do with the social comfort, has to do with the sensory comfort as well of a place, and the signals of belonging or non-belonging that they're also getting from others. It's a framework that I think it can be rich and it can be holistic. And I think that people don't need a training into this or anything. They just need, I guess, to sharpen their curiosity and their skills to collaborate and to listen, to actively listen. I think in the context, much of the work I do, I'm director of the group in Group for Research in Relationships and Neurodiversity. And with some of you, like Maria, is an associate, we have done some work together. And I think much of what we look at is the social determinants of mental health. And much of that, particularly for neurodivergent people and mental health, has to do with that sense of belonging. So very often we talk about inclusion, how our service is going to be more inclusive, how the school is going to be more inclusive. Inclusion is good. Belonging is better, and it's harder. And many neurodivergent people rarely feel that they belong. Inclusion in the school is that, I'm in the lunchroom, I don't know who's going to come to talk to me, I'm freaking out a little bit, the lights are not great either, but I'm allowed, to have my, the noise cancelling headphones, and I'm allowed to be in the room, and people kind of cope with me steaming or doing whatever. Inclusion is probably me being in the library room with 3 other people who are super nerdy about the topic. I'm very nerdy, and something is happening there, and I feel like, I feel I belong, and I feel more sensory comfort and more social comfort. And I think what's fascinating, since I started, being in that field and understanding and learning, is how very often we measure belonging and other stuff as a skill or as something that you have or you don't have. When it comes to autism, it always goes down into the discussion of learning social skills, learning how to be less autistic, pretty much, learning how to be. But belonging is about being embodied, is about, feeling it in the spaces where you are. It's relational. And I think an experience-sensitive approach is asking us to avoid more reductive or purely behavioral approaches. No problem with contextual behavioral science, can be excellent. But I think there's something about when it comes to neurodivergent people, their voices to be heard and meanings to be created together. So very like this, I think it's now 116 years of neurodisorder science about autism, for example. And it has always been described from the outside, from the eyes of neurotypical people, what it is, what is not, and so on. And I think we have a lot to learn from each other, autistic and non-autistic, ADHD and non-ADHD people, by attending people's inner life, bodies, spaces, narratives, how they make sense. So it's all about active listening, which I think sometimes can be hard. We're not very well trained always to listen and examine our assumptions. And I think it fits very well with what nowadays very often people will talk about neurodiversity affirming, neurodiversity informed, whatever you want to call it. The way I understand it is about centering agency, diversity, and having that relational respect in research and clinical practice. I think there's a number of cultural, ideological, scientific reasons. So Nuka Bach has written an editorial, and he puts it so beautifully because he moves from, if you like it, the activist side, which personally I have no problem, but I think it's not enough. There are also scientific reasons on how, for example, there's such a big disconnect between systems and lived experience. I haven't looked recently at what's happening here, but in England, we know neurodivergent people don't attend school, are excluded from school, are severely restrained, and their behaviors are controlled constantly in ways that doesn't work. And I think it happens in many countries. And there's very different, this is framed very differently in schools compared to what the families are telling us or what the young people are telling us. There's definitely ethical and ideological reasons around, how do we humanize that field? So many people have been telling us about interventions and what is it like to be asked to be less of who you are or to change parts of your neurology. We need to do much more research to understand hiding self or masking and all these concepts. But I think the main thing is we do very often intervention. We're saying to people, have early intervention. What do we really intervene with? How much do we intervene with the person and the skills that potentially they might want as well to grow, and how much we intervene with creating more supportive environments where people can also be and grow. And perhaps the most convincing part in terms of science and research is that the last 30 years, there's very little progress in terms of translational science that is closing the gap in terms of understanding, but much more that is having a positive impact in the lives of people who are autistic, ADHD, or have learning disabilities. I spoke a little bit about belonging, and I give you just one or two examples. I'll skip through this quickly. But, when you think of belonging, for example, and mental health in neurodivergent people, or all people for that matter, from an experience-sensitive approach, you think about the opportunities that neurodivergent people have in our clinical practice or in research to be attended by others, their inner experience to be heard, to be recorded in research in a way that is respectful, rather than imposing generic categories, a priori questionnaires that are made, by the way, by and for neurotypical people. So what are we measuring as well there is interesting sometimes. It's about treating people not just as an autistic person, but also or ADHD person, or you name it, but also as someone's brother, sister, parent, citizen, friend, part of the whole. And then when we think of experience-sensitive approaches, we think of a continuum. On the one hand of the continuum, you can think agency or insiderness. This part of the category of the dimensions, if you like, that we have, that refer to how we humanize practice, or that refer to collaborative practice. And on the other hand of the spectrum, the very extreme, we have dehumanizing practice that objectifies people, that is asking them to be passive, that is working on them, if you like it, rather than with or for them. For belonging, people need to feel that they play a role, that they have a voice, that they're shaping whatever is happening in a research project, in their school council, in their clinical therapy care program. If neurodivergent people are only passive recipients of decisions, then something doesn't really work. I'm going to skip. I have more examples. Some of the ways we have been using an experience-sensitive approach. Sorry, I'm flexing these two programs because I'm just so proud about them. But it's one of the ways we have tried. We have run for 3.5 years, supported by NHS National Autism Trainer Program, and it's a program where we work with 110 multiply neurodivergent, mostly autistic people. And we developed 2,000 slides. We created 4 days training for health and justice, special schools, inpatient community all ages, outpatient community all ages, and we measure different competencies. You can all find it online. I'm not going to talk more about it. And we have impact case studies. We trained 5,000 people, and they were trained to co-deliver to psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses, SLTs, and we trained them not only to deliver our 3 days program, they trained 4 days because it was train the trainer, but also how to work with trained experts by experience and train all together their services. So they create local capacity, and they don't have every time to look for a program from outside, so they can look at their own, can upskill their services, can measure competencies, growth, and so on. It is available right now across all ages and is rolling. It is adapted officially by NHS. And the latest update I had, it was in Lancashire. We have trained 50 nurses that they have already created a local map and a plan how in the next 3 years they're going to train 7,000 people in NHS, which is just so nice to see that, the momentum continues and there is impact. And I think what all people have been telling us, it has been making a difference, is that we approached, it wasn't a training about what is autism. It was a training about autistic mental health, autism and psychosis, autism and depression, autism and eating disorders, not just with the textbook of what the latest research is telling us, but also how autistic people translate that. And there was a lot about, adaptations that they would like to see and they find helpful. Autism Central is the other program I mentioned a bit earlier that I'm currently working. And again, it is made by and for, this is not for clinicians, it is made by and for families. So families are creating monthly educational material that is available to everybody in the country. And family members are trained, many of them also neurodivergent themselves, are upskilled to offer peer group education and peer one-to-one sessions. We offer 100 webinars per. I say these numbers and it's just a heavy program. 100 webinars run by families, for families per month, and close to 700 hours of one-to-one peer work as well. And what we hear is about how, people with lived experience, when they are upskilled, can really attune, can really get it. It's non-clinical, it's not the full answer, but it's really supporting people to prevent social disconnectedness and loneliness and prevent, to a degree, crisis. So we try so many things, and we try all these different things in your teams, in my teams, looking at autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, because the statistics are just really sad and scary. Evidentially, in every measure, life outcomes for autistic people, ADHD people as well, on average, are significantly poorer than those who are non-autistic, non-ADHD, or don't have learning disabilities. If you are autistic, by the age of 12, you have 28 times, you're 28 times more likely to die from suicide or to have suicide ideation. And that's not something in the genes. People were not born programmed to feel this way. So we need to wonder why people don't feel that they belong here. With ADHD, the statistics are also quite dramatic, both in terms of suicidality, also people dying from preventable causes, not having good access to healthcare, not attending school, and so on. I want us for a moment to think, how do people become what they are and what they think about themselves? Well, all of us, in order to grow, we develop an internal narrative, a sense of self. We're making sense of ourselves based on what we're shown, who we are, on the ways we are shown about what we are, who we are in relationship with the world and the others. I'm from Greece, just in case my accent, you thought I'm a Londoner. But the first time I ever, many years ago now, it wasn't in 1995, it was 2001, I think, this conference. The first time I went as an undergrad there to see what's happening in the field of autism. The National Autism Society of Greece represents, with this labyrinth, autism. This is the labyrinth that they have in Crete. I need to do my Greek thing now. Let me think. Yes. So Ariadne is holding the thread, right, to navigate the labyrinth, to go in there and kill the monster. It was half human, half monster, not fully human. This is the representation of autism. So if I'm 12 years old, 9 years old, 25 years old, and I go and say, okay, there's one national trusted resource. Probably the psychiatrist says to your mom, check in more information as soon as you get the ASD diagnosis, check more information there. And you find out that you're represented as a labyrinth, as a problem, as a half human. And the Saxonic culture is not much better, the puzzle. The first National Autistic Society think it was a big puzzle with a white, young boy, not a girl, not just sitting, but crying, weeping, the sadness, the tragedy, the puzzle. So just take a moment. What narratives shape neurodivergent people's deepest ideas about themselves in your local society, in the flyers, in your website, in their school? I just find it fascinating how we're constantly meant to be in a world that think of people as aloof, broken, disorder, complex, dramatic. I don't know, I could have a list only of the things I have heard as well for myself. I was saying earlier to Helen, I'm also a clinician and I have been, I did a 4 years training in psychotherapy. And it was impossible to say to people, I'm neurodivergent, because I couldn't deal with all the things they would come up or how they will see you afterwards. And in supervision groups, it was really tough to hear about how people were talking about very damaged client with ADHD. Very damaged, like the narrative of, reports. The reports we're writing for these kids as well are very interesting, the vocabulary we have. I mean, in science, in our papers, we talk about deficit, impairment, all these things are there as well. I'm not going to talk about this guy, you know him. And it's everywhere. It's in Greece, and it's in Spain, it's in Italy, you know, there's all these dodgy kind of adverts. Oh, there is hope that we will cure autism. There's this, there's the other. Some really good colleagues at the University of Durham, Monique Botham and her team, they put into one or two I don't even remember the names, AI kind of, you know, and they put autism, autistic, Asperger's, you know, whatever vocabulary fits autism. And they said, you know, create pictures for me, show me what autism is. And this is a very representative sample of what the machine gave them. What do you see? Very dark, sad, male, young. Again, you know, and machines haven't done that on their own. They're picking up on our narratives, of course, right? But when we do ask people, with my PhD students, with colleagues, when we ask them, what is it happening in your life? This one is a project, is a paper in preparation, in progress. We haven't submitted it yet. When we asked those who are in post-16 colleges education, who are autistic with and without learning disability, some of them ADHD as well, what is it like? When do you feel you belong? What aspects of your college life help you, you know, to manage life better and your well-being? They talk about having a friend, having somebody who really gets it. We can talk forever about my special interest, all that stuff. Lots of sensory stuff. This is not representative because this is very fluffy and soft, and other people have different, you know, sensory stuff. Not surprisingly, video games, and they spoke about how much they regulate from the very predictable sensory, visual kind of stuff, but also the sense of agency that they get there. So you can see the difference, right? But they also do talk about how difficult it is to be in places where they don't belong, where they don't feel welcomed, and where they kind of know that the teacher wishes that they had less autistic students in the classroom. They have seen their parents crying because they got a diagnosis. And as I think in the paper we call her Mia, she's 16 years old. When we ask her, you know, what is it like to be in your school? She's assigned female, they are assigned female at birth. They created this kind of thing with the clay. She's on the one side on her own, bleeding, and she just doesn't fit in. And she says, you know people don't like you, and if you feel that nobody is liking you, then you start taking that very seriously, that there's something wrong with you. You feel like you are not good enough for the people, and that's why they don't like you, and you start making sense of that kind of self. Lots of types of narratives like that, and I think that's why my emphasis on sense making, experience sensitive approach, and how do we get these narratives, and how do we then do something with that. To be or not to be at school, school is massive stressor for young people. Is one of the first places where they are treated like they're different. They are told they're different. They also feel different, and the heavy toll of hiding themselves, of not being allowed, not giving permission to be who I am. I think that when we were looking at results across different projects, and we look at ADHD, one of the things I so much also resonate is so many young people told us that they get in trouble when they're excited. Even not, never mind when they punch doors and they spit into face, when they're dysregulated and they go down that route. But when they are excited, and others think that they're too much, that they want to overtake the space, or, even the sense of joy and excitement is so not welcomed, and it's putting you in trouble. So you can't even say to people how excited you are, and you can't keep bunking your point about something that you really want to talk about. And that happens as well in social media. Laura Scallon has just finished, one of our PhD students, a paper looking at the experience of how people present themselves in social media. And again, they say, I really need to read the room. I really need to check the space. I really need to choose which version of myself I'm going to present. When it comes to ADHD, we don't know much yet about how, is it really that ADHD women are hiding? I think to a degree, yes, they're masking. We have some early data, but I don't know as well to which degree we call hiding, or or are they hidden because of the criteria are all based, again, on white, male, and they have different ways of being hyperactive or all of that stuff. In another project we have been completing, when we asked 300 parents with a good colleague, Emma Ashworth in Liverpool, about, how families find the journey into, seeking for help and the journey of long waiting times, first comes appointment, being disappointed in the first comes because there's another waiting time, but also very standard delivered CBT that may not be suitable for all the young people. Very often in that journey, the first starting point of accumulating trauma is how people don't have appropriate provision at school, feel very isolated at school. Parents also have to be monitoring themselves, particularly middle-class parents who are very educated, who dare to go in the school and make a buzz about what they need. They also feel very restrained because they're also called dramatic, too much, angry mom, da-da-da. And that's the people who are privileged. Imagine the people who don't even have the capital to be there and ask what they need. So in so many ways, I think it does make sense to be eclectic in our approaches and to have some space for neurodiversity informed, experience sensitive kind of work in clinical and research practice. I think what it does for me, I will start from my second point, is that it humanizes everybody in the process. When you understand people's experiences. For one, you understand nothing of what I said so far is rocket science. Why should it be? But I think you understand as well, apart from the differences, our shared humanity. People want to belong. Like people want to be part of something. People want to have a healthy narrative about who they are, and to be accepted. So they're not asking something that is very special to autism or ADHD. It helps you also, though, to understand the barriers that need to be lifted for them to be able to enjoy what all humans want to enjoy. So to me, it takes that us and them as well. It helps us to pay attention as well to not just to the differences in the profile, in the language, in the skills, but also to our shared humanity, to common needs. The other thing that is very profound for me is that these narratives and these experiences are very often telling us that, yes, maybe there is space for me to fix X, Y, Z, and maybe there's a big desire as well, which we shouldn't underestimate, that there's definitely something about creating support in the environment, creating opportunities in the environment and lifting barriers from the environment. And of course, the power of, so many groups are working beside each other, but not together. Is that for me? Oh, okay. So anyway, this is kind of how we are trying to work with different teams across UCL and Anna Freud. And we have done a book with 25 autistic people who have been, talking about their perspective in terms of trauma, depression, school attendance, and so on. All this kind of collaboration, I need to say that it's a very dirty job, it's very difficult, and very often we call it an adventure because it is. Genuine collaboration means that we will disagree, that we will share power, that we will also recognize hierarchies, and that we will work together. I think one of my favorite examples of how this can happen is my experience with colleagues from King's. And we have two papers that you might find useful. This one sets led by Edmund Sonuka-Bark. I was so happy to work with him on this one, and it's co-authored with the young people who have been working with us as youth co-researchers. Sets, if you like it, the values and ideas of how teams can come together and manage conflict, manage sharing of ideas, and so on. The other one is where we present a whole protocol on how we can work together with young people, not only into an advisory role, but also to set up together aims, objectives, and co-deliver analysis with them. And we have tested that. And I think it's really interesting as well. And part of the results that talks about how it wasn't only, we have interviewed academic researchers, youth researchers, and participants in the project. And it was really interesting to hear about the participants in the project. What was it like for them to have to be interviewed or to have EEG, different experiments with somebody there who is neurodivergent and who pays that extra kind of attention to the sensory, to the social stuff, and what a kind of restorative and interesting experience it was for them. So I'm going to cover some bits and pieces about how we reapproached emotion regulation. When we applied with the team to examine emotion regulation, we looked at emotion regulation and dysregulation in very classic terms, and in terms of resilience, and in terms of building skills for resilience. When we worked with the young people, and we were determined to kind of get that right with them, they spoke in very different terms. They spoke about upsetting experiences. They spoke about managing negative experiences, and so on. We work with them to prepare them, to upskill them to be co-researchers, to be partners, to co-design interviews, EEGs, different tasks, and to make progress with us and analyze data as well. When we started the project, we wanted to cut down risk of depression for autism and ADHD. And the kind of formulation from the neuroscientists and the psychiatrists in the team was, autistic and ADHD people have specific features. They have differences in the frontal cortex. They have differences in amygdala. They have alexithymia, you name it. And all these things can create difficulties in reading emotions and managing emotions and mediate the relationship with depression. When we spoke with young people, it was kind of reframed. They were telling us on how, when you're autistic and or ADHD, you are consistently provoked more times. You are consistently experiencing intense, longer and lasting experiences. And that can lead to chronic stress, low self-worth, rumination, which are known to, relate with depression. And then the more depressed you might be, the more you get isolated, the more you ask less for help, and the more the encounters and everything around you becomes even more difficult, and it goes into that circle. Also, the more low mood you have, the more you ruminate, the less regulatory capacity you have. You find it more difficult to deal with your emotions, with your upset, and that on its own creates its own then challenging experiences. So what do we do then? How do we support them? How do we adapt settings? How do we train them in new approaches to change emotions, to manage their emotions, and so on? I think the first step from an experience-sensitive approach, it was to understand what are the negative experiences, in what terms people talk about things that trigger emotion dysregulation, and also what do they do themselves to prevent and to manage these experiences. So we wanted to focus on their perspective. And I think that was pretty important because our current knowledge base is pretty limited. When you think of emotion regulation and classic emotional regulation scales, they are very much led by adult observations. They are using tools that have been created in adult measures, and they have been put into the child measures, but also very, very often, all the time, basically, in terms of emotion regulation at least, but also I think in anxiety and depression, they are made by and for neurotypical people. They measure concepts away a neurotypical person potentially perceives them. So there is that neurotypical lens, and there is a deficit lens around, as a very individualistic within the person as well approach. But the young people keep on telling us about all the things that are happening around them. I don't know if you can see, this person has said to us how they feel in the school environment and how they name themselves the complex. Breaks my heart on so many levels, but mostly because I have been that person in schools and in clinics that I have been calling young people complex. And I think I was doing that every time. I had no clue, and I thought they're high risk, and I thought I'll send that to the psychiatrist. But this is how you call somebody complex, and then the teacher is going to read about it, and they already have a narrative about them, and then the other person and the other person, and these young people are very aware that we do that. So in terms again of current intervention base, to my knowledge of how we were looking at typical England practice, interventions when it comes to emotion regulation, they are not specific and well researched in terms of autism and ADHD. Skills-based, teaching the person to breathe, to do different things around their skills. Many of them look at behavioral modification, and many of them, at least in England, are compliance-focused. Basically, you have to learn to regulate your emotions correctly because there are so many zero-tolerance policies as well, and you get very much in trouble. Kids are going into isolation rooms. Do you know zones of regulation? Schools love it. I used to use it in my clinics as well. Basically, it's telling you that, Helen, you are in the yellow zone. You're a little bit worried about what I'm talking about. I will not stop doing what I'm doing that upsets you, but you go out there and have 10 wall push-ups, jump on the trampoline, sort yourself, and come back. Nice. On green zone, please. If not blue. No, I mean, I exaggerate. I'm sorry, but do I exaggerate? I think we're asking people to leave an upsetting experience, go out there, sort themselves out. If they are very lucky and we have OT, SLT, blah blah blah, it might be a bit personalized. Otherwise, we just say, okay, we give them, very standard things for every zone that they're not even personalized to the person. The experience-sensitive approach. In our research in Restart with colleagues from King's, we found that we asked people to talk about negative experiences and how they manage these negative experiences and what helps them to prevent negative experiences that lead to dysregulation, how they manage them while they are into that zone, and what do they need in terms of recuperating from that. We asked them, we had a very personalized approach in terms of, people could take photos, people could draw pictures, they had the interview schedule in advance, they could record themselves because some people are situationally mute or might struggle, in the moment to give answers. They made models from Lego, from clay. Some of them, they wrote poems, different ways of expressing themselves, which led to an agenda that came then from them. It allowed us to come with topics that we wouldn't have thought in terms of the interview schedule. They describe different parts of their day, what is dysregulating for them, and so on. Some of the results. So basically, I invite you to read, if you have an interest in that topic, these two papers. I'll cover a little bit of both if I still have some time. But from the results that we got from young people, we co-created with our team that idea of the emotional burden, the accumulation of high levels of common upsetting experiences, intensively felt, consistently felt. And we didn't have a focus back then in the school environment. We were looking across home and school, but the school came up as the proper big red zone, as the source of significant unhappiness itself. So we're asking people in this paper, 57 people, autistic, ADHD, or ADHD, about, stuff that make them, that contribute, upsetting experiences that contribute to them having dysregulated behaviors, punching, crying, being upset, so on, self-harming. So first most common topic identified, and we have over 600 quotes on this one, super painful to read, in my opinion, was about social dislocation, alienation, and conflict. So people spoke about not being part of relationships and how much that annoys them, but also when it comes to autistic people, feeling that they're stigmatized, feeling that others don't want them because of the diagnosis, feeling that it's really hard to be in a school where somebody runs in the corridor and says, I wish I was dead rather than being autistic, like the narrative of how horrible it is. With those with ADHD, that wasn't that much the issue in the narratives, but they spoke on how they are constantly prone to unsafe and provoking interactions, how their felt experience of how people don't listen to them, correct them too much, asking them too much. And people from both groups spoke about how these experiences are leading them to being angry, to from externalizing to internalizing as well, behaviors as well. Those with the dual autism and ADHD diagnosis said that they find themselves so much more often in conflict and in incongruent relationships and communications with authorities, school staff mostly. And I give you a sample of, again, how people spoke about it. So they spoke about that sense of people don't like me, I'm going to be alone, and how this is building up, and then they present very dysregulated during the day at school, mostly. At home, for many of them, it was a safe haven. They were allowed, to do their thing, or at least to feel understood. The second most common upsetting experience that the young people themselves identify as key to dysregulation is the experience of hiding one's true self and the need to mask. They mostly spoke about it as hiding, as not giving permission to be. I think it's really interesting to pay attention to what the autistic folks told us here, thinking as well of theory of mind, and autistic people don't have empathy. Protecting all this from my feelings. I can be in such a dark place. I can have so much rumination. I can think so much about the war, about the injustice in my classroom, but also about myself being alone, from the previous topic, and I'm hiding all that. It's piling up because I don't want to make all this worry about me and the darkness I kind of bring. When it comes to ADHD, folks also said that, they want to protect all this from very intense emotions that they're having, but also they wanted to protect themselves from one more punishment. They were like, I can't be again in trouble. I have to hide my happiness or my disagreement, or, I have not to say the truth to what I think about how bad what the teacher just said or another student said. And of course they are hiding, but until they are not. And when they are not, this group is mostly neglecting sleep, eating, and self-harming. Although all groups had much of that, but that was particularly relevant to autistic people. For ADHD people, it was I was holding it, but then I had to punch him because all week, I was holding it. Imagine that Coca-Cola effect. Many of them, spoke about. And then those with dual diagnosis, a sense of constant guilt. Like, is me again not getting it? Is me again not understanding it? And having to manage that constant big guilt and confusion also meant that at some point they were losing it and they were externalizing. Again, you can see a sample here. I think this drawing is one of my favorites again. Maybe you can't read it, but on the one side, this student, she talks about how she's creative and she's full on and she has some skills that others appreciate as superpowers. She doesn't think it's superpowers. And on the other hand, she's stupid. She loses her stuff. She can't go on time anywhere. She can't, that sense of the messages that she has about herself. She can feel good on so many levels. But the messages she gets from the outside, it's just trouble, it's just not enough. Internalized self-doubt, loathing, and embarrassment. I think, again, on this one, we must have something like more than 300 quotes on people telling us that one of the key reasons I will end up crying, I will end up speaking in what is perceived as a rude way, or getting in emotional distress, is about the fact that I internalize so much self-doubt, and I don't even give permission, even when the environment, the school says, oh, what accommodations you have, I'm embarrassed about it. So many people said about the fact that they will not ask for help. They will not give themselves the permission. Yeah, thank you. So, again, a sample. You can have the slides. I'm happy for you to have the slides. These were qualitative data. We wanted to have hard data, if you like it, and we wanted to create a new tool. So we used, we worked with young people to understand how we could turn our data into a psychometric tool. Steve and the team have done such an amazing job. We worked for many weeks to create the Emotions in School inventory, messy. I love the title as well. I just fits, I think, the whole team. And we looked at the emotional burden in school as a source of mental health problems associated with ADHD and autism. It's really interesting because, and I think I will finish with that. So we looked at different groups: autistic, ADHD, OADHD, and neurotypical students. We wanted to look at how do upsetting experiences and their emotional impact differ between neurodivergent and neurotypical youth. Does emotional burden independently predict mental health difficulties? Are commonly upsetting experiences similar or different across groups? So, we took some from what the students have said in the interviews, and we created with them items like school staff don't listen to you or challenge what you say, simple stuff. I think it has 25 items. We asked 735 adolescents aged 11 to 16 years old. That's the age of the people we interviewed as well. And we found out that although emotional burden was not the only pathway for dysregulation, we had a dual hypothesis. We looked at emotional burden with that new neurodivergent-led scale, but we also looked, using the emotional dysregulation, there's alexithymia, we looked at within the personal deficits, if you like it. They both show strong links with depression and anxiety. But emotional burden on its own was strongly associated with depression and anxiety. And I think for me, obviously, there is a need for more joined-up approaches, but also there's something we can definitely do about emotional burden because it's environmental. Whereas the last 30 years, we haven't really found a way to make sure that the neurodivergent person will have less alexithymia or less this or less the other. So I think it can be a pretty important message. I might finish with that one. Can you guess what was more upsetting? I mean, one fascinating stuff, I think, it was that neurodivergent people also found the same thing. Neurotypical people or non-autistic, non-ADHD people found the same struggles, by the way. It wasn't unique. They were all upset with the specific things that the teacher was doing, that the school was doing. But the difference is that the statistical analysis showed that those with a diagnosis of autism, ADHD, or both were exposed on a normal, average, good day twice into upsetting experiences. They were bullied more, they were told off more, and so on. Any guesses about, differences between autism and ADHD? Yes.
So not a guess, but what do you mean by differences? In
terms of upsetting experiences? Yeah, sorry.
Then I guess I would assume kind of ADHD students, a lot of maybe like older students. There's a lot of like content being thrown at you and a lot of expectation. You kind of sit there and pay attention, so to speak, which should be pretty upsetting because it's like you both have to pay attention to the content and pay attention to not letting yourself be yourself.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Imagine with autistic students, there's maybe a difficulty of expectations of students, for example, and like having to communicate with others and navigate those hurdles.
Thank you. Close. So ADHD, their top 10. Autism, their top 10. I'm not going to tell you more about it. I will stop here, but we are looking this cross-sectional data into longitudinal study. We have published the protocol, but not yet the 1-year follow-up in terms of emotional burden. You know, why do ADHD autistic folks are in higher risk of anxiety and depression? And I'm not going to tell you what helps. I'm hoping you can read our paper, which again had a very similar experience-sensitive co-production approach. This time asking what helps. And I think it's again fascinating because we assume that zones of regulation or other very standard universal programs have the solutions. To a degree for ADHD students, that was true, but for most of them, it was very different stuff they were asking. I'm not going to say more. Thank you so much for your attention. I think we have some time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgia. I mean, on my part, I think what you've done is just really flip the way we think about this, which is so exciting. But can I open to questions and comments? Jason?
Thanks, Georgia. That was an excellent presentation. I loved your science and the things that you're doing. Really resonates with some of the things that...
I'm going to come closer so I can hear you.
It really resonates with some of the things that we're trying to do here as well. Very much a little more personally emotional about, as an autistic person, thinking that I completely identify with the findings that you had, even at the age of 49, still now, it's daily. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's me. So I mean, if it feels, I don't know, I just thought it was so valid and so appropriate. My question I had for you though was, at the moment, I think the neurodivergent community is experiencing something of an attack, if you like, a division, because a lot of the kids that are giving you real, genuine experiences there are currently being dismissed by certain researchers from the autistic sphere, in the sense of profound autism or only autism with learning disabilities matters. But I imagine that most of your participants are probably not so-called profound autism. And I just wondered what your response was to that kind of message that's brought out just now, and how, as researchers, we respond to that.
I have very specific things in my mind as you were talking about. I don't know. I think to me these are divisions that I perceive them as divisions that don't serve much. I think we have vocabulary for profound autism. I think we talk about autistic people who have learning disability, and there's different levels of the learning disability. Complex, profound, da-da-da. I think it just adds clutter instead of clarity. People talk about profound autism and they mean somebody with severe learning disability who has epilepsy, who have Ehlers-Danlos, who has hearing problems, cerebral, do you know what I mean? And all the previous years that before, if you like, autistic people come in academia or autistic people create their space, these people were underserved already, and they're still underserved. I don't see how vocabulary or concepts, I don't know, I find it very divisive, I find it pointless. I think from a neurodiversity perspective, neurodivergent people can have all sorts of abilities, all sorts of needs. I haven't done much research. I mean, in my PhD I did, and in my clinical practice, I have been working with people with learning disabilities for 25 years now, which is a lot. And but I have colleagues like in Sheffield, I think, in Manchester, who do amazing work into getting the perspectives of those who might be not speaking with or without learning disability, for example. And I just don't get it how an autistic person that speaks is an enemy to an autistic person that has learning disability, because there's some kind of things in the news. But I was also thinking when you said that about very big professors in the news saying that autistic women are not potentially autistic or masking doesn't exist. I think we need so much more research to what even we define as masking, and we don't have longitudinal and population studies. We need evidence, but at the same time, we hear it every day from people hiding themselves, for people killing themselves basically because they can't be and they can't belong. So sorry, I don't have an answer. I'll stop here, but I think these are not the real dilemmas I think that the community needs to have.
I just wanted to check, are there any questions online? There was a question in the chat. Are there any plans for the NATP programme to be rolled out to other regions?
Well, it's we run it proudly for 3.5 years at Anna Freud, but now belongs to NHS. So it runs across England. I know that from time to time, Scotland, Ireland have conversations for a national program. If people want conversations, I can point them to different directions. They can email me.
I've got another question online, but before I go online, any other questions in the room?
For this, but some of the outcomes looking forward for this kind of related to understanding my own neurodivergence was during my Master's of Entrepreneurship program, and I did my thesis was on understanding autistic people's experiences in the workplace, and it was very interesting reading like people talk about their experiences and how one of the concerns for neurodivergent people and their families is this support and the kind of the sudden lack of it, leaving that transition period at the end of school. So I was wondering what you thought, because it's a lot of the same issues that come up in the workplace as they do in school. So I was wondering your thoughts on that, on how we can use this to transition these young people.
I mean, there's such a gap between 1625 or 1825, depending on how services define it. There's so much work that needs to be done. There are good models. I think we have reached the point that some very good principles across from behavioral, from humanistic, from whatever, from the neurodiversity movement itself, from translational science. I think we have lots that we can do. And one of the things we noticed in the National Autism Trainer Program is that autistic people who are failed by the system, who are in severe mental health crisis, we're writing a book actually right now. It's going to be an open access book coming out. I was supposed to come in March, but I didn't finish it. So maybe September, we will see. But it has 17 case studies from autistic people with psychosis, with personality disorders, some indeed, some others, not sure. And when we worked with them to understand, what is it that you want to see in the services, they didn't come up with any rocket science stuff either. Can you imagine what was the first thing and the main thing they were saying in every account? I want to be taken seriously. I want to be heard. I want to be part of my care program. People feel that they don't matter. There's lack of epistemic trust. They feel that they come and they need to fit into a manual. People who are doing the manual have been trained sometimes only for 1 year in low intensity CBT or whatever. So we have lots to think about how people can feel that they can, and then they go to a meeting and they say, I had really nice people who invited me into the agenda to co-produce my goals, use goal-based outcomes, whatever. And I was in a room that was too warm with noise. I didn't have the agenda in advance. So people who really care and invite people in the workplace as well, they say, we're all about accommodations, and they invite you in a room that you smell 50 different perfumes. You don't know the agenda. You haven't been told how people are going to be sitting. And you didn't have time because of your processing. You just show compliance. You say, yeah, You agree to things that you don't have an intention to agree. So lots of communication, simple stuff if you like it. I think, at least in my experience in England, schools are much more cruel than the workplace. I think the workplace is a hype right now. ADHD, oh, you're going to overwork as well for us. Good. I mean, when I was at school, I was in trouble. At work, I do 17 hours per day if I want. Nobody seems to complain. It brings money, all good. I think there is much more accommodation and space to think outside the box, because thinking outside the box also can bring money to companies. Whereas at school, I think your soul gets a bit more destroyed.
So I think that's a really, I wish we didn't have to finish. Unfortunately, we're out of time. There's a couple of questions online. Would you be willing for me to maybe email you?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you. And thanks for such interesting questions from the audience. And just thank you so much for a really thought-provoking talk. Thank you so much.